All right, we're going to turn now to Ontario provincial politics with a federal connection, as Ontario Liberal MP Nathaniel Erskine-Smith is questioning the results of an Ontario Liberal Party nomination race, a race that he lost by about 19 votes.
Given everything we've seen in the race to date, and for some frustrations along the way with disallowing members, and then we see scrutineers in that room articulate concerns. I honestly have to do a full debrief with them before I decide next steps, before I decide if I really consider the outcome fair.
So Erskine-Smith had thrown his hat in the ring for the provincial nomination in Scarborough Southwest and was expected to quit his federal job to run for the Ontario Liberal Party leadership, even releasing this video ahead of that nomination vote.
A guy who gives, big ideas for the country across a huge range of things. But one of the things that I've found is, and this is rare, to be honest, distinguish, you can have the ideas, you can have the hard work, but also to be really on the ground with your constituents, knowing what's going on, what their needs are, and working together.
Okay, so what happened? Well, here to break it down is journalist Sabrina Nanji, founder of the Queen's Park Observer. Sabrina, this was a bit of a shock when I saw this on Saturday. A tight race with the winning candidate, Ahsanul Hafiz, securing the nomination by, 19 votes? And Erskine-Smith says he may challenge the results. Well, what's going on here?
Yeah, you're right. 19 votes, a razor-thin majority, a very hotly contested nomination that has been very dramatic from the get-go. And, it's not usually in nomination races that we're focused on the loser, but all eyes, you're right, are on Nate Erskine-Smith right now and what he's going to do next. I mean, the nomination contest for the by-election was seen as the first hurdle in his broader ambitions to run for the provincial leadership. And as we heard him say at the outset, he's waiting to debrief with his team. But in that scrum with reporters, he did kind of raise allegations and concerns about voter ID issues. He called into question the results of the race. And he does have 72 hours to file a formal challenge, which is tomorrow night. So we'll see what comes of this. But he even called out the party establishment. And then today at Queen's Park here, we heard from interim Liberal leader John Fraser, who basically said, these nomination contests for any party is like a family squabble, and they can get really intense. But at the end of the day, everyone should come out on the same side and rally together because there's a by-election to be won. And Fraser essentially kind of hit back at Nate Erskine-Smith and said, if you've got these allegations that there were some irregularities, then prove it and say it. And so again, Nate's got one more night to put that together, but a lot of questions now about what he does next.
Okay, but so he's raised concerns about voter ID issues and irregularities, and certainly in a race this close, a recount, as we saw in the federal election, it can swing things. But did he offer evidence and proof other than sort of concerns?
He was pretty tight-lipped about it and pretty cagey. And then when he was pressed by reporters, he said things like lost driver's licenses, or maybe someone had just moved to the area. And what we were hearing from party officials was that, there were voters rejected and approved on both sides of the fence here. And John Fraser in particular has said that, they're standing by the results. This was a free and fair process. So I guess we'll see whatever proof Nate Erskine-Smith can provide if he does decide to challenge this. But at the end of the day, I think Nate's always been kind of a polarizing figure in politics. And if he's someone that wants to lead this party, everyone's kind of looking at what he does next to see, whether these results are going to really impact or hurt his leadership ambition.
Well, look, he's the MP for Beaches, East York, trying to run in Scarborough, seen as a bit of an outsider in that particular riding. I think it's safe to say, though not an outsider to the Ontario Liberal Party. I mean, how much of a factor was that? And just where does this leave his leadership? Because if you can't win that, how do you win the big one?
Yeah, and that's the question there. And, to be completely fair, this was a really close result, 19 votes. I mean, you're right. If this was a general election, that would have been an automatic recount. But I do think that, for someone like Erskine-Smith, who we saw in that, kind of awkward but chummy video with Mark Carney in the 11th hour, there's really, the two haven't exactly been best friends in the same way that Doug Ford and Mark Carney have had their bromance, right? Like Erskine-Smith had been calling out Carney for not making it back into cabinet shortly after he was elected. And so I think that a lot of that has rubbed a lot of liberals that I'm speaking with the wrong way, and that Nate's kind of got this like sore loser attitude. But at the same time, there are a lot of people who are rooting for him and really supporting him. And so I do think that if he's going to challenge this, he'll still have a lot of supporters, and I don't think his leadership is going to be dead in the water. But this was never going to be a slam dunk for him, right? Like his opponents in the nomination had frequently said he doesn't live here. He's just using this as a stepping stone for his broader ambitions. They had even had a pact between them that they were going to rank each other first and second, pulling those votes away from Nate Erskine-Smith. So while, this was never going to be a cakewalk for him, I would say that the stakes were arguably the highest for him, because he basically said that he would step down as MP as soon as Doug Ford called the by-election. But obviously now, he's suffered this very devastating blow. And he says he's going to debrief with his team and make some decisions. I hear that that's, happening today as we speak. So a lot of questions certainly surrounding, the future of what he does and what this is going to mean for the provincial leadership.
Okay, so Sabrina, just quickly, so we don't know what's going to happen yet on the challenge. There's been some buzz that there will be a challenge, but who knows, right? He was expected to resign as an MP to run in this. I don't know if that's still going to happen. And what does this mean, do you think? Like, is his leadership dead in the water now? Because like Navdeep Bains is coming in and he's going to have a machine behind him, the former industry minister and Roger executive. I mean, what's next for this guy beyond the challenge?
Yeah, and like I said, I don't think that losing the nomination is necessarily killing Erskine-Smith's leadership bid, right? You're right. It's going to make it harder. You can't win a nomination. How can you win a leadership? But this was a very close race, and they're not going to make it easy for him. Navdeep Bains would be an absolute juggernaut in this race. But interestingly, both of them kind of have some of the political baggage of being, in Trudeau's government, and Trudeau wasn't exactly the most popular, especially on the way out. But there's still a long ways to go before November. Right now we've only got Dylan Morando, a former staffer and advisor, and sitting MPP Lee Fairclough, who have officially thrown their hat in the ring. Rob Sturjanik is someone else who's expected to run, and there are a few others. So I do think that Erskine-Smith has carved out, his brand as a more progressive, a liberal, and there is still an appetite for that in the party. I think it was definitely a risk for him going into this nomination. And so it remains to be seen what he decides to do with it. But I don't think that his leadership bid is going to be dead at any point. And even who knows what happens with his federal MP seat. You're right. There's a lot of questions surrounding this.
Yeah, look, Nate Erskine-Smith is always a good interview, always a fun interview. So if he wants to come on and talk about it, we will make the space. Thank you for your time today, Sabrina Nanji, founder of the Queen's Park Observer. Thanks so much.